November 18, 2020, 9:42 p.m. 34-year-old Daniel Mercer steps out of his front door for what should have been a 2-minute favor. A doorbell camera across the street captures him turning toward his neighbor's driveway, phone in hand, as the last light of dusk fades behind him. 17 minutes later, his phone goes completely silent. At first, nothing about the footage seemed unusual. Daniel appears calm, unhurried, even familiar with where he's going. He doesn't look like a man in danger. But investigators would later admit there was something in that video they didn't recognize. Something happening just outside the frame, just beyond where anyone thought to look. Because Daniel Mercer didn't just disappear. He walked into something that had already been set in motion. And for months, everyone studying this case focused on the wrong details. They replayed the same angles, the same moments, believing they had seen everything. But they hadn't. What they missed was small, quiet, almost invisible. And once you see it, the entire timeline changes. November 18, 2020, 9:42 p.m. 34-year-old Daniel Mercer steps out of his front door for what should have been a 2-minute favor. A doorbell camera across the street captures him turning toward his neighbor's driveway, phone in hand, as the last light of dusk fades behind him. 17 minutes later, his phone goes completely silent. At first, nothing about the footage seemed unusual. Daniel appears calm, unhurried, even familiar with where he's going. He doesn't look like a man in danger. But investigators would later admit there was something in that video they didn't recognize. Something happening just outside the frame, just beyond where anyone thought to look. Because Daniel Mercer didn't just disappear. He walked into something that had already been set in motion. And for months, everyone studying this case focused on the wrong details. They replayed the same angles, the same moments, believing they had seen everything. But they hadn't. What they missed was small, quiet, almost invisible. And once you see it, the entire timeline changes. Daniel Mercer lived on Hawthorne Ridge Drive, a quiet residential street in the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. It was the kind of neighborhood where porch lights stayed on overnight and packages could sit untouched for hours. Most of the homes were built within the last decade, with identical mailboxes, trimmed lawns, and driveways just long enough for 2 cars. Daniel had moved there 3 years earlier after a promotion at a regional logistics firm. He wasn't someone who chased attention or excitement. He preferred structure, routine, and predictability. Friends described him as dependable to a fault, the kind of person who would show up early, stay late, and follow through on anything he agreed to. He lived alone in a modest 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac. His parents were in Michigan, his younger sister in Chicago, and although he wasn't constantly surrounded by people, he stayed closely connected. He called his mother every Sunday. He never missed birthdays. And he had a habit of checking in on neighbors, especially the older ones, during winter storms or power outages. That detail would matter more than anyone realized. Because Daniel Mercer was not careless. He locked his doors. He kept his phone charged. He shared his location with his sister during late-night drives. He didn't take unnecessary risks, and he didn't ignore his instincts. If something felt off, he would step back, reassess, and wait. But on November 18th, nothing felt off. The day itself had been unremarkable. Daniel worked from home, logged into meetings, answered emails, and placed a grocery order for the weekend. Around 6:30 p.m., he heated up leftovers, sat at his kitchen island, and watched a basketball game on low volume. There was no sign of stress, no unusual calls, no disruptions to his routine. At 8:57 p.m., he sent a text to his sister about a package he had ordered for their father's birthday. The message was casual, even light. He included a photo of the item and a short joke about how long shipping was taking. She responded minutes later, and the conversation ended normally. At 9:18 p.m., Daniel's phone connected to his home Wi-Fi for the last time. What happened next would seem insignificant at first. At 9:39 p.m., Daniel received a call from a number saved in his contacts. The name associated with it was Aaron Pike. The call lasted just under a minute. Aaron Pike lived 2 houses down. He was one of the few neighbors Daniel interacted with regularly. They weren't close friends, but they had an easy familiarity. Aaron was in his early 40s, worked irregular hours, and had moved into the neighborhood about a year after Daniel. They had exchanged tools, helped each other with small repairs, and occasionally chatted at the curb. Nothing about that relationship raised concern. According to phone records, the call ended at 9:40 p.m. 2 minutes later, Daniel stepped outside. But this is where everything begins to shift, because what seemed like a simple neighborly favor would become the last confirmed moment Daniel Mercer was ever seen alive. At 9:42 p.m., the doorbell camera across the street activates. The motion sensor catches Daniel as he walks down his driveway. He's wearing a dark hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. His posture is relaxed. His right hand holds his phone loosely at his side. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't look around. He moves with purpose, but not urgency. As he reaches the sidewalk, he turns slightly toward Aaron Pike's house. The two properties are separated by a narrow stretch of lawn and a shared view of the street. From the camera's angle, Aaron's driveway is partially visible, but not the front door. Daniel crosses into the frame's far edge, and then he disappears from view. 17 minutes later, his phone goes silent. At 9:59 p.m., his device disconnects from all networks. No calls, no texts, no data usage. It doesn't power off. It doesn't send a final ping. It simply stops communicating. At first, no one notices. Daniel wasn't expected anywhere that night. He had no scheduled calls, no appointments, no immediate obligations. It wasn't unusual for him to step out briefly or even turn in early. But by the next morning, something feels wrong. His sister tries to reach him around 10:15 a.m. The call goes straight to voicemail. She sends a message. No response. By noon, she calls again. Still nothing. Daniel had never gone that long without responding. Not without explanation. By early afternoon, concern begins to take shape. His sister contacts a mutual friend in Columbus. They drive by Daniel's house just after 2 p.m. His car is still in the driveway. The porch light is still on from the night before. The front door is closed. Everything looks normal. Too normal. But this is where another detail quietly slips past everyone. Because inside that normal scene, something is already missing. The friend knocks. No answer. They call Daniel again while standing on his porch. They listen for movement inside. Nothing. At 2:27 p.m., they contact local police for a welfare check. Officers arrive within the hour. They approach the house the same way Daniel did the night before, walking up the driveway, stepping onto the porch, knocking firmly. When there's no response, they circle the perimeter. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No disturbances. Eventually, they make the decision to enter. Inside, the house is clean, organized, undisturbed. Daniel's wallet is on the kitchen counter. His keys are in a small dish by the door. His laptop is open on the dining table, exactly where he had been working the day before. Nothing appears out of place, except Daniel isn't there. And the longer officers remain inside that house, the more unsettling that absence becomes. Because people don't just vanish from spaces like this. Not without leaving something behind. Not without a trace. But this case would begin with something even more deceptive. The illusion that nothing had gone wrong at all. And that illusion would delay the truth longer than anyone expected. Because everyone was looking for signs of struggle, when they should have been looking for something else entirely. The investigation begins with a timeline that seems simple. At 9:39 p.m., Daniel Mercer receives a call from Aaron Pike. At 9:42 p.m., he is seen on surveillance walking toward Aaron's property. By 9:59 p.m., his phone goes silent. 17 minutes. Investigators build everything around that window. At first, Aaron Pike is treated as a routine point of contact. When officers speak to him the following afternoon, he appears cooperative, calm, slightly confused, but not defensive. He confirms the call. According to Aaron, he had been having trouble with a loose exterior light fixture near his garage. He tells police he asked Daniel if he could come over and take a quick look, since Daniel had helped him with a similar issue weeks earlier. He says Daniel came by. He says they spoke briefly in the driveway, and then Daniel left. That statement becomes the foundation of the early investigation. But this is where things begin to diverge, because Aaron cannot provide an exact time Daniel left. He estimates it was only a few minutes after he arrived. Maybe 5, maybe less. He insists nothing unusual happened. No argument, no tension, no reason for concern. He describes the interaction as forgettable. Investigators note the lack of detail, but nothing immediately contradicts his account. So they turn to surveillance. The doorbell camera across the street becomes the most important piece of evidence. It shows Daniel walking toward Aaron's property at 9:42 p.m. The footage is clear enough to confirm his clothing, his posture, even the phone in his hand. But it does not show what happens next. Aaron's driveway sits just outside the frame. There is no direct visual confirmation of Daniel reaching the front door. No footage of him leaving. No sign of any other person entering or exiting. And that absence becomes the first major gap. Police canvass the neighborhood for additional cameras. They collect footage from nearby homes, street-facing systems, and a traffic camera positioned 2 blocks away. They reconstruct the area minute by minute. No vehicles enter the cul-de-sac during that 17-minute window. No pedestrians pass through. No unfamiliar movement. From every available angle, the street appears still, quiet, uninterrupted. But this is where everything tightens. Because if Daniel arrived at Aaron's property and left shortly after, as Aaron claims, then he should have reappeared on at least one of those cameras. He doesn't. Not once. There is no footage of Daniel walking back toward his house. No footage of him leaving the street. No footage of him anywhere after 9:42 p.m. And that creates a contradiction investigators cannot ignore. Within 48 hours, Aaron Pike shifts from a routine witness to the central focus. Detectives return for a second interview. This time, the tone changes. They press him on the timeline, on the exact location of their interaction, on why no cameras captured Daniel leaving. Aaron maintains his story, but small inconsistencies begin to surface. He revises the length of the conversation. First it was 5 minutes, then maybe 10. He says they stood near the garage, not the driveway. Then he says it was closer to the side yard. The details move, not dramatically, but enough. And in cases like this, movement matters. A search warrant is obtained for Aaron's property. Officers begin with the exterior, the driveway, the garage, the side yard. They document everything, measure distances, look for signs of disturbance. Nothing stands out. No obvious evidence of a struggle. No damage. No traces of blood. No discarded items. Inside the house, the same pattern continues. Clean surfaces, organized spaces. No immediate red flags. But investigators are trained to look beyond the obvious. They focus on what isn't there. Time, continuity, consistency, and slowly, a theory begins to take shape. If Daniel never left the property, then something happened within it. But proving that is another matter entirely. Forensic teams process the home thoroughly. They collect fibers, swab surfaces, analyze flooring. They bring in luminol to detect traces invisible to the eye. The results come back inconclusive. No definitive biological evidence linking Daniel to the interior. No clear indication of violence. Legally, it's not enough. And this is where the case begins to stall. Because suspicion is not proof. Days turn into weeks. Daniel's family pushes for answers. His sister speaks publicly, describing him as cautious, responsible, not someone who would disappear voluntarily. Community searches are organized. Volunteers comb nearby wooded areas, drainage paths, and construction sites. Nothing is found. Not a phone. Not clothing. Not a trace. The absence becomes the defining feature of the case. And then, 3 weeks later, investigators make a decision. Aaron Pike is arrested. The charge is not murder. It's obstruction of justice. Prosecutors argue that Aaron knowingly provided false statements during the investigation, that his shifting timeline and inconsistent descriptions indicate deception. But even then, the case remains fragile, because there is still no body, no confirmed cause, no direct evidence tying Aaron to a violent act. The prosecution builds its argument around probability. Daniel was last seen heading to Aaron's property. He was never seen leaving. Aaron's statements are inconsistent. Therefore, something must have happened inside that space. At trial, the defense dismantles that logic piece by piece. They emphasize the lack of forensic evidence, the absence of a body, the possibility that Daniel left through an unseen route, outside camera coverage. They argue that assumptions have replaced facts. And for a jury, that distinction matters. In the end, Aaron Pike is convicted of obstruction. He receives a reduced sentence. But he is not convicted of harming Daniel Mercer. And legally, the case remains open, unresolved. Daniel's family is left with something far more difficult than closure. Uncertainty. Years pass. The footage is reviewed again and again. Investigators revisit the same 17 minutes, the same camera angles, the same assumptions. They focus on Daniel, his movements, his posture, his path. But this is where the investigation makes its most critical mistake. Because everyone is watching Daniel, every frame, every second, looking for something unusual, something out of place. But what they don't realize is that the answer was never centered on him at all. It was there from the beginning, visible, recorded, and completely overlooked. A single detail, quiet, peripheral, sitting in the background of the very footage they believed they understood. And it would take years before someone finally saw it. For nearly 3 years, the case of Daniel Mercer sits in a state of quiet suspension. No new leads, no new evidence, just a timeline that begins with a simple favor and ends in complete silence. Detectives revisit it periodically, reviewing the same footage, the same interviews, the same 17-minute gap that never quite makes sense. Each time, the conclusion feels just out of reach, until someone new looks at it. In early 2023, a digital forensics analyst named Claire Donnelly is assigned to review a backlog of unresolved cases tied to residential surveillance footage. Her role isn't to reopen investigations, but to enhance video quality using updated software, stabilization, light correction, frame interpolation, technical work, routine. Daniel Mercer's case is just one file among dozens. But this is where everything changes. Claire begins with the same doorbell footage investigators had relied on from the start. The clip is familiar. Daniel steps into frame at 9:42 p.m., walking toward Aaron Pike's property. Phone in hand, posture relaxed. At normal speed, nothing stands out. But Claire isn't watching for behavior. She's watching for data. She slows the footage to half speed, then a quarter. She isolates frames, adjusts contrast, expands the edges of the image where compression artifacts had once blurred detail into noise. And that's when she notices it. Not Daniel. Something else. At the far right edge of the frame, barely visible beyond the boundary of the streetlight's reach, there is movement. Subtle, intermittent, easy to dismiss. But it doesn't match anything else in the scene. Claire flags the segment and zooms in further, frame by frame, second by second. And what emerges is something no one had documented before. A vehicle, parked without headlights, positioned just beyond the visible curb line, angled slightly away from the camera. It had been there the entire time. But this is where the detail becomes critical, because the vehicle is not stationary. At 9:43 p.m., less than a minute after Daniel exits the frame, the silhouette shifts. A door opens, not fully, just enough to register a change in shape. Then it closes again. No lights, no engine, just motion. And in the original footage, it was almost impossible to see. Compression had swallowed it. Darkness had hidden it. And investigators, focused entirely on Daniel's path, had never examined that corner closely enough. But Claire doesn't stop there. She cross-references the timestamp with other cameras collected during the original investigation. Most had been dismissed early, either due to poor angle or low resolution. One of them faces the entrance to the cul-de-sac. The footage is grainy, monochrome, easy to overlook. But now, with a specific time in mind, Claire isolates the window between 9:40 and 10 p.m. At 9:58 p.m., a vehicle appears. No headlights, rolling slowly out of the neighborhood. It matches the position and shape of the silhouette from the doorbell footage. And more importantly, it leaves at the exact moment Daniel's phone goes silent. 17 minutes. Not a coincidence. A pattern. Claire compiles her findings and submits them for review. The case is reopened. This time, investigators aren't asking what happened inside Aaron Pike's property. They're asking what happened just outside of it. They re-examine Aaron's original statements, his inconsistencies, his shifting timeline. And suddenly, those movements take on a different meaning. Not deception to conceal a crime, but confusion about something he didn't fully see. When questioned again, Aaron recalls something he had dismissed at the time. A sound. He describes it as a car door. Soft, indistinct, easy to ignore. He assumed it came from the street. He didn't connect it to Daniel. But now, that detail aligns perfectly with the footage. At 9:43 p.m., the moment the vehicle door opens, the moment Daniel disappears from view, investigators begin reconstructing a new timeline. Daniel walks toward Aaron's property. He reaches the edge of the driveway, and before he ever makes it to the front door, something intercepts him. Not inside the house, not in the garage, but in the narrow strip of darkness just beyond the camera's reach. That's why no footage shows him leaving, because he never made it past that point. The focus shifts to identifying the vehicle. Enhanced stills are circulated through regional databases. Analysts examine shape, proportions, wheelbase. It's a dark-colored sedan, older model, common enough to blend in. But one detail stands out. A slight dent along the rear passenger side, visible only in a handful of frames. That dent becomes the key. Traffic cameras from nearby intersections are reviewed again, this time looking specifically for vehicles matching that profile within a broader time window. And after days of filtering, one match appears. At 10:07 p.m., 9 minutes after the vehicle exits the cul-de-sac, a camera captures the same sedan at a gas station 2 miles away. This time, the lighting is better, clear enough to see the license plate. The vehicle is registered to a man named Victor Hale, 38 years old. No direct connection to Daniel Mercer, but a history of burglary and opportunistic crimes in residential areas. When investigators locate Hale, his car is still in his possession. The dent matches. Forensic testing reveals trace evidence inside the vehicle consistent with outdoor soil from Hawthorne Ridge Drive. Confronted with the evidence, Hale initially denies involvement, but timelines don't lie, and slowly, under pressure, his story changes. He admits to being in the neighborhood that night. He claims he was looking for unlocked vehicles. He says he saw Daniel walking alone, and he made a decision. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly that decision would escalate. According to Hale, he approached Daniel near the edge of the driveway, attempting to distract him, possibly intimidate him into handing over his phone or wallet. But Daniel resisted, not recklessly, not aggressively, just enough to disrupt the moment. And in that narrow space between houses, out of sight from every camera, the situation turned. What followed wasn't planned. It wasn't controlled. And it ended with Daniel being forced into the vehicle. Hale drove away minutes later, 17 minutes after Daniel stepped outside, exactly when his phone went silent. The case moves forward. Charges are filed. This time, the evidence holds. Not because of what was seen clearly, but because of what was almost missed entirely. At trial, prosecutors present the enhanced footage, frame by frame. They show the jury the edge of the image, the movement no one noticed, the door opening in darkness, and how that single detail rewrote everything. Aaron Pike is cleared of suspicion, his inconsistencies recontextualized as the byproduct of an event he never fully witnessed. And Daniel Mercer's case, once defined by absence, finally gains clarity. But it comes with a weight that doesn't lift easily, because the truth was always there, captured in plain sight, just beyond where anyone thought to look. And it raises a question that lingers long after the case is closed. How many answers exist at the edges of what we think we understand? How many moments pass unnoticed because we're focused on the center of the frame? Daniel stepped outside to help someone. A simple act, routine, predictable, and within 17 minutes, everything changed. Not because of something obvious, but because of something almost invisible. If you take anything from this case, it's this. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's just waiting in the place no one thinks to check.